So, today, let's talk a little bit about alla prima. Alla prima is an Italian word that means all at once, and painters use it to mean they're going to do a quick painting and finish it all at once. This is a type of layering as well, where you layer your oil paints using the fat over lean principle. So, we do that in all kinds of oil painting, but this is meant to be a quick painting. This is meant for studies or some people who are doing very expressive paintings. You often see this used in the type of painting that Monet and other Impressionists championed because they were painting outside and there's a lot of wind and there's sun and there's bugs and there's all kinds of environmental issues for that make you want to paint quickly. So when I'm doing studies, I definitely use the principle of fat over lean. And in some paintings, I'll use other methods like grisaille, which is a much more long process. But today we're going to be talking about this process. It's called alla prima. Now, what I've done here is I've taken a piece of paper that is intended for oil painting, and it's been primed a couple of times. So I'll do my drawing layer and I'll figure out the dimensions and everything that I want. And then I will take a clear gesso and I will gesso over top of it. Or you can use a acrylic medium too. I would recommend like a matte medium because when you're using oil paint, you want a bit of grit to whatever you're putting down, because oil paint is, when it's thin, it's sort of like, think of olive oil and vinegar, like it's kind of cut like that, where it's very drippy. So the kind of medium that I like to use is a clear gesso by Liquitex, and it actually has a bit of like a grit to it, and it works really well for these paintings on paper. And painting on paper can be a little tricky sometimes because the paint dries out quickly. If you're using a substrate, so substrate here meaning what you're painting on, if you're using a substrate like wood or aluminum, your paint tends to stay wet longer. But because you get so much more air circulation in something porous like paper, your paint is going to dry out quickly, and sometimes it dries out as you're painting, so be prepared for that. It is a different animal than other forms of oil painting. So, but what I like about it is the barrier to a study is very low. You don't need to spend a lot of money to do a study on paper. You can buy some good quality paper, and that's decent enough to do what I'm doing here. So what I've done here is I've taken my oil paints, and I like to start with a very, very bright colors. And then I will thin them down with my thinner, and I use Gamblin's Gamsol. It's a odorless mineral spirit. It's probably the least toxic way to oil paint with, a traditional oil paint setup. Gamblin is a color house that's known for its archival paints and its desire to keep everything environmentally friendly. So I really like their products for that reason. They're also a small Seattle-based color house. I live in BC, so Seattle's really close to me, and I like the idea of kind of keeping things as local as possible. It also keeps costs down for me. So if you can find a color house that you find good and local, and they Maybe they do student grade paint so that, you know, you have that, again, lower barrier to trying oil paints. Which is kind of why I'm doing this video, is because I think a lot of people are concerned that the oil painting is expensive, and oil painting is hard to get into and hard to learn. But if you have an avenue like being able to paint on paper, being able to use paints that are good, they're not like the kind of quality that you would find in, say, a craft or a dollar store. They're actual paints that with decent pigment load, then you can really learn a lot about paint. And I encourage you to try different brands, because each brand puts out a different version of each color. So for example, I love to use a lot of reds, a lot of magentas, and one of my other favorite colors is Prussian blue. And Prussian blue can be a variety of different blues depending on the maker. Another good one that you see is Payne's Gray. Payne's Gray can be very dark, and it can also have a blue tinge. And some brands have a gray tinge. So this changes it a lot. When you're looking for a paint that has the right mood that you're going for, it can really change the look of your painting if you're using a Payne's Gray that has a blue tinge, as opposed to a Payne's Gray that will turn gray if you I don't want to say water it down, but if you dilute it with other color pigments like white, for example. Another reason I really enjoy Gamblin paints, and I'll plug them and use them a lot, is because their website is incredible. So if you're living in a smaller community, like I live in a smaller community, and I'm a very research-oriented person. I like to thoroughly research any pigments that I purchase, because, you know, time is money, money is time, and if you can sort of know what you're getting into ahead of time, it saves you a lot of time. So I will look up what kind of colors can I get from this one pigment, and Gamblin has the best website for that. They really thoroughly show all of the different, you know, general interactions that their paints will have with other pigments. So you have it mixed with white, you have it mixed with black, you have it mixed with different colors, so that you can kind of see its interaction before you go and spend anywhere from $10 to $30 on a pigment. Very important that you know what kind of tinting strength your pigment is going to have. I find that there are some pigments that I have bought that were very expensive, but they become a workhorse where I use them in every painting, and I use them all the time, every day. So it's very important to kind of know what you're getting into. So as you can see in this little study that I'm doing of Sadie Sink in her role as Max on Stranger Things, I like to take the thinnest version of the paint and go and mark out everything. So I'll mark out the shadows, I'll mark out the highlights, I'll mark it all out. And what you want to do when you're using pigments that are intended to stay very bright and you don't want them to get muddy, is you do need to lay them out in a certain way. You want to move from darkest to light. So your highlights, which really make the piece what it is, that's the last thing you're going to do. In oil painting, you want to put all of your darker colors down first, so as to retain the brightness of the pigment, because it's very easy to get muddy paint. Now, if you've painted with oil paints, you know exactly what I'm talking about. I know the first few paintings that I did were complete failures, and I scrubbed them off the substrate because they just weren't worth keeping. Now, if you've had that experience, don't feel bad. Sometimes it's good to keep some of your really terrible paintings because then you can look back on them later and go, wow, I've really come a long way. I know that I found a couple of paintings that I did, and I was surprised that I kept them. But again, they were paintings on paper, so they're easy to store once they're dry. They're great for looking back at who you were in the past and what kind of painting you were capable of when you started. So I encourage you to do that. So here you can kind of see I've layered some more actual paint on top, and when I do this I use a medium that's called walnut oil, and it will kind of give the paint some movement, some viscosity, and it also just helps the paint kind of layer. And as you go from the very thin down version of Gamsol to the walnut oil and paint, you can start adding more paint with the walnut oil and gradually get to thicker and thicker layers of paint. This gives a more finished look, as you can kind of see. I know I have more work to do on her hand and the highlights. I know I'll get to it pretty soon. I had to stop, so this wasn't truly an all-at-once painting, but we'll finish Max in the next little bit. So, what do you think so far? Does it look good? Do you like it? Do you want to see it finished? Did you enjoy seeing some of the beginning at regular pace? Let me know below. Thanks!